Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Please take your seats. Last welcoming at the door after summer break. Good to see many ambassadors back. Welcome. I hope you all had a good summer break, but in this house we never have a break. Therefore, I call to order the informal meeting to conduct an interactive dialogue with Mr. Olara Otunnu, candidate for the position of the United Nations Secretary General. Today's interactive dialogue marks a critical step in the selection and appointment process for the next Secretary General, while also coming at a pivotal moment for the United Nations. The person we select will be more than the face of this institution. Our choice will send a powerful message about who we are and whether we truly serve all 8 billion people of the world in all their diversity. The multilateral system with the United Nations at its center is under unprecedented political and financial pressure, from a deepening liquidity crisis to fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter being put into question. The next Secretary General will be entrusted not only with navigating these challenges, but also with advancing essential reforms to ensure the United Nations is fit for the future. At the same time, the world needs the United Nations more than ever, and it needs a Secretary General who can provide strong, principled, and effective leadership across all 3 pillars: peace and security, development, and human rights. These interactive dialogues, which I convene in line with General Assembly Resolution 79/327, offer a unique opportunity for candidates to present their vision for the future of this organization, and for member states and civil society to ask questions and interact directly with candidates. The interactive dialogues are essential to ensuring a transparent and inclusive selection and appointment process while underlining the important role of the General Assembly. I encourage you to make full use of this opportunity, and I thank all candidates for their active participation, member states and civil society for their questions and engagement. But these dialogues do not end in this chamber. They are also an opportunity for people around the world, the very people the United Nations serves, to listen, to engage, and to hold this process to the highest standards. For this decision does not only concern a few, but all of us in and outside the United Nations, and who look to this institution to reflect the principles and values it champions. As reflected in my letters dated 4th March, April 15th and August 6, 2026, the dialogue will begin with an introduction by the candidate of their vision and priorities for up to 10 minutes, followed by an interactive exchange. Each interactive dialogue will last up to 3 hours. The interactive exchange will take place in 2 segments, as we have practiced many times before. We will begin with an 1.5-hour discussion focused on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. Following this, we will move into the second segment, which will focus on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. In line with Revitalization Resolution, civil society representatives will be invited to pose questions in each of the 2 thematic segments. Before proceeding to hear the presentation of the vision of candidate, I would like to inform members on how to inscribe to speak in the 2 thematic segments. Delegations wishing to speak can register their wish to speak by pressing the microphone button. Please do not press the microphone button yet. I will announce when delegation will be asked to press the microphone button at the beginning of the first segment. Member states speaking on behalf of a group are invited to approach the list of speakers table and will be given priority. Delegations can speak only once in each segment, whether on behalf of a group or in national capacity. In the second segment, priority will be given to delegations that did not have an opportunity to speak during the first segment. Now, I invite Mr. Otunnu to present his vision. Please, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Excellence, Madame la Présidente.
Excellencies, Madam President of the General Assembly, distinguished ambassadors, esteemed delegates, members of civil society, Madam President, I thank you for organizing this dialogue and for giving me the opportunity to engage with you. I would like to thank the Secretary General as well as the staff of the United Nations for their dedication and service to the organization. Our tribute to them is all the more poignant today on the anniversary of the deaths of 22 United Nations staff in the August 2003 bombing of the UN offices in Baghdad. Among those killed were two of my dear friends, Sergio Vieira de Mello of Brazil and Nadia Younis of Egypt. And one of the survivors, Mr. Salim Lone of Kenya, is with us today in this very chamber. I also wish to salute my colleagues and fellow candidates for their commitment and their offer to serve the United Nations. Madam President, in the UN Charter, there is a focus on this solemn commitment. We, the people of the United Nations, are resolved to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, to ensure the equality of rights between men and women, as well as between great and small nations, to establish the conditions for justice, and to promote social progress, as well as to ensure better standards of life in larger freedom. It is upon the bedrock of this collective pledge that the three pillars of the UN's work are built. That is to say, peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. We must continue to work substantively on all of these pillars. The United Nations is the only body that represents all of humanity. It was founded in the aftermath of a brutal global war and against the backdrop of the Holocaust to promote international cooperation and to foster the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. At no time has this mission been more essential than today. We are living at a time of profound upheaval and radical changes marked by grave threats to international peace and security. There's growing fragmentation of the global economy, and deep economic fractures. There is a wavering consensus on the fundamental principles of human rights. Crucial issues linked to climate and environment are arising at a time when autonomous systems and artificial intelligence may evolve to dominate the human race. And yet, with rapid advances in the field of AI, together with other major advances and profound transformations in science and technology, this may lead to a golden age in human history, a time in which hitherto incurable diseases could be prevented or cured, a time to lift billions of people out of poverty through financial and digital inclusion. It is against this backdrop of hope and of great promise, as well as of growing threats, that the United Nations once again is called upon to fulfill its historic charge.
Even though we must keep our view firmly on the three pillars of UN action, from time to time the flow of events will shape priorities and emphasis. Today we are in a situation of major conflicts around the globe. These conflicts must constitute a particular priority for the Secretary General. Engaged, present, probing, listening, seeking opportunities to suggest a way out, all recognizing that in the end the decision will be on the part of the parties in conflict and the major players. I especially have in mind the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, the Great Lakes region of Africa, Sudan, Iran, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel. One of the most disturbing features of the situations I refer to is the fact that innocent civilians, particularly women and children, are disproportionately affected by these conflicts. It is one of the reasons why we cannot stand still. We must do everything within our powers to act. Over the years, we have continued to emphasize the importance of human rights. In the words of the Charter, fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. These are the words of the Charter. And we must return to the basics in terms of the regime of human rights of which I speak, the basics as postulated in the Charter. For a human rights approach to be credible and enjoy broad legitimacy, every effort must be made to guard against politicization, instrumentalization, and the intrusion of ideology in our pursuit of human rights. There should be greater sensitivity to different cultural perspectives and social norms. The UN must better understand and acknowledge the deep traditions and cultures of human dignity, respect, and social cohesion that exist in many societies. This, in part, will be my approach for rebuilding consensus on the issue of human rights back to the basics. For the United Nations to discharge the responsibilities set out in the Charter, let me say this clearly and simply. Reform is no longer an optional choice. It is an imperative. Without it, the institution is at grave risk. We cannot continue to do business as usual. To do so would be a grave mistake and error of judgment. Key to the organization's success is its legitimacy, effectiveness, and efficiency. And therefore, the reform initiative subsumed under UN 80 must not only be continued as a priority of the Secretary General, but be a continuous process that becomes part of the DNA, the outlook, the culture of the organization. Every organization that wishes to be at the cutting edge, vibrant and viable, must consistently bring review and constantly. Madam President, as Secretary General, I would put priority on harnessing the incredible force which is being unleashed by artificial intelligence to make this a force for good for the entire world community with access and benefit for all. I have, over the last 5 years, been based in northern Uganda. And when the calls and messages asking me to consider to be a candidate for this position came, I was in northern Uganda. What was I doing there? Many of you will recall this is a part of the world that was radically destroyed, collapsed, as a result of over 20 years of the LRA war. So I've been engaged with others in the enterprise of rebuilding, of restoring, of resuscitating a terribly broken society. I have some idea what peace building means at the ground level. And I believe that United Nations should make it its business to enunciate policies and standards from New York and Geneva and Vienna, but also follow to see the impact on the ground at the national and community level. And finally, Madam President, what I offer, if I'm given the opportunity to be Secretary General, is broad and very deep experience of working across all the 3 pillars of the UN. It is a track record of building consensus and offering innovative solutions in times of deadlock and crisis. And I would just, Madam President, please end on this note because this inspires me. It is St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. I would embrace this role with the same passion, commitment that I've shown in every leadership position I've had here. I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegation wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Interventions should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity, and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. As before, time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoff. A timer will be projected on screen to assist speakers to observe their time limit. Their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before the time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes for questions from delegations speaking in national capacity, and not more than 3 minutes from delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. I will remind candidates, I would remind you, Mr. Otunnu, also to stick to your speaking time limits. I will hand you over a card. You don't have automatic microphone cutoffs, but to have a fair and transparent process for everybody else, I would kindly ask you to stay within the time limit. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative from Qatar on behalf of the Arab Group, followed by the European Union and Nepal.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. We are honored to speak on behalf of the Arab Group, and we thank Mr. Olara Otunnu for presenting his vision and priorities for this position. We reaffirm our availability to work with the candidate to enhance the organization's ability to deal with the current challenges and to further establish sustainable development and the UN Charter principles. We have the following questions. First, with regards to the differences in the implementation of international law between countries, what do you think about the issue of non-selectiveness in order to enhance the credibility of the multilateral system and enhance the reliability of these standards? Second, how will you work on increasing the effectiveness of the efforts of the organization with regards to the question of Palestine in order to implement relevant resolutions and obtain a sustaining peace? Third, we see an increase in conflicts and challenges related to the respect of international law and to the UN Charter. How do you propose that this adherence should be strengthened and to enable UN organizations such as UNRWA from fulfilling their roles? Fourth, as for the liquidity crisis and the regression in development efforts and the issue of rising debt, how will you work on the development pillar and advance the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda and provide help for developing countries? Fifth, what is your opinion on the reform of the Security Council? Which mechanism do you think would be most effective? And what is your opinion also on the expansion of the Security Council and the use of veto? Sixth, what do you see? How do you view the UN 80 initiative and its possibility and effects on the organization? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar on behalf of the Arab Group. Just as a reminder for everybody, we have 3 hours. You can also come back to some of the questions if it's not possible in the time limits. Please, Mr. Otunnu, you have the floor.
First, on the reform of the Security Council. Very important project, very historic project. The primary responsibility falls on member states, especially the permanent members and the other members of the organization, to continue working, discussing, and come up with a consensus that is viable. But as Secretary General, I would very much encourage this and underscore the fact that there's some historical imbalance that needs to be corrected, but there should be a consensus that is forged between the permanent members and the rest of the membership. Development continues to be exceedingly important. And indeed, I'm concerned that we don't seem to be on track on current indications for fulfilling the SDGs. Particular emphasis should be put on garnering more resources, on encouraging developing countries to assume more responsibility within their own countries, so that we perform better on the SDGs than we did on the Millennium Development Goals, with which I was very much involved. On the UN Charter and the principles in the UN Charter, these principles are for the entire United Nations and the entire membership. And indeed, they should be applied, they should be invoked, they should be promoted without any selectivity whatsoever. That goes for our promotion of human rights, broadly speaking. It goes for promotion of international law, broadly speaking. We should go back to the basics, I said earlier, but once at the basics, we should not be selective in the application of these values and norms. Thank you. Yes, on Gaza and Palestine, you heard me say that among the conflicts on which I would focus immediately because of the unacceptable level of suffering and tragedy is the Gaza situation. But we should not stop at ending the current phase of the conflict. It's exceedingly important that we begin as a matter of priority to address the root cause of the problem and have a long-term solution to this problem. I say a little bit more in my little vision statement on this matter. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for sharing your vision with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. At this critical juncture, the United Nations needs a Secretary General who can build trust, reduce polarization, and bridge divides. Someone who can mobilize collective action, accelerate UN reforms, and deliver solutions that make a real difference in people's lives on the ground. It also needs a Secretary General that is fully prepared to defend and promote full respect for the UN Charter and international law, and all three pillars equally. We emphasize this last point because the EU's support to the UN reflects precisely that premise. We support all strands of the UN's work equally. On peace and security, we actively advance the implementation of key UN mandates through our security and defense missions around the world. On sustainable development, we provide close to 50% of all ODA and over 1/3 of all voluntary contributions to the UN system, safeguarding the SDGs and battling inequality. And on human rights, we are committed to protecting and defending all human rights, civil and political, economic, social and cultural, with equal vigor. And we are therefore deeply concerned with recent normative attacks on human rights, including on women's and girls' full enjoyment of human rights and on gender equality, as well as racial, religious, political and other forms of discrimination and persecution, and also with the fact that, remarkably, only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates. It's a clear imbalance between the three UN pillars. So against this backdrop, I'd like to ask the following question. As Secretary General, how would you plan to protect and increase the funding of the human rights pillar as explicitly mandated in the Pact for the Future? And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. First, as I said earlier, all the three pillars of UN engagement are important. And one of the pillars is obviously human rights, enunciated in the very charter of the organization. At the moment, I know that expenditure on human rights is exceedingly low, so I would explore all other avenues permissible that would make it possible to increase funding for human rights activities. But that must be in the context of what I said in my remarks, that we reform the institution, we go back to the basics on the issues of human rights, and we apply them without any selectivity. That's the basis on which I would act. But I would definitely press member states to provide more resources for the work on human rights. And all the other comments that you made, Excellency, about trust, the importance of the UN Charter and the principles, international law, the importance of being clear with mandates, absolutely I'm in agreement with those.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries, followed by the Republic of Korea and the next or first civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of least developed countries, the countries that are recognized as the most structurally vulnerable and yet the furthest behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The LDC group would like to thank Mr. Otunnu for the presentation and kindly request to share his observations on the following two questions. First, if elected as Secretary General, what will be your strategic approach to mobilize and direct adequate, predictable, and concessional resources to LDCs? And how will you reorient the UN development system so that supporting LDCs to achieve the SDGs becomes a visible system-wide priority at the country level? Second, in the face of ongoing financial constraints, how will you ensure that resources and dedicated support to LDCs, including to the LDC dedicated UN mechanisms, are protected and strengthened rather than reduced? And what specific measures will you put in place to ring-fence this support from across the board cuts? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. There are two sides to this ledger. First is the responsibility of the least developed countries in the first instance to make sure that their houses are in order, that there is adequate planning, that there is local investment, mobilization of resources, that one is fighting corruption. That then provides the legitimacy, the moral grounds on which the Secretary General can go knock on other doors to mobilize resources to support the efforts at the national level. And the knocking on doors should not only be the multilateral institutions that we know, the international financial institutions, but also there are now increasingly important role being played by the private sector. And the Secretary General will be at your disposal to do everything he or she can to mobilize resources to support your efforts at the national level.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, also on behalf of Austria, Egypt, Ghana, Myanmar, Norway, Peru, Portugal, and Sweden.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for joining us today. I have the privilege of delivering these questions on behalf of the 9 member states, which the Norway, Sweden, Myanmar, Australia, Peru, Egypt, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, and Portugal, that have had the honor of having their nationals serve as Secretary Generals of the United Nations. Drawing on our experience and institutional memory, we wish to contribute constructively to the current selection process and stand ready to support both the process itself and the next Secretary General. The responsibilities entrusted to Secretary General under the chapter are profound. While the chapter designated the Secretary General as the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization, it also assigned the office an independent political role in the maintenance of international peace and security. As complex conflict continue to unfold across the globe and calls for reform of the organization grow ever stronger, the United Nations require a Secretary General who can successfully navigate both the political and managerial dimensions of the role, equal parts of diplomat and advocate, civil servant and CEO. As a member state, they have honor of having their nationals serve as Secretaries General. Our questions are, first, the office of the Secretary General frequently require difficult judgments between principle and pragmatism, public advocacy and quiet diplomacy, action and restraint. In your course of your career, have you faced a situation in which you have to make such difficult judgment? What lessons and principles from your experiences would guide you as Secretary General? Second, drawing on the experience of the previous Secretary General, what lessons do you believe remain most relevant for the next Secretary General? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea on behalf of those countries having had a Secretary General. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We must begin with principles, but we don't stop at principles. We must see what can work, what is practical, and probe and forge consensus where possible. So I do not see principles and advocacy as being in conflict. They're a continuum of action. Secondly, Excellency, yes, I have been in some very difficult situations which are very much analogous to what you're referring to. In the Security Council, I referred earlier to the deadlock of 1981. In the General Assembly, we had the crisis of Grenada in 1983. I was the chair of the Credentials Committee and had to find a way to build a consensus and to get out of that deadlock. When I was building the regime for protection of children and women in situations of conflict, same, discussing with Security Council members to incorporate this on the agenda of the Council. So yes, I have been in such situations. I have experience of how you navigate in this difficult situation and come up with an inventive solution based on consensus you have built.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the first civil society organization, Civicus, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Jesselina Rana, representing Civicus. Mr. Otunnu, your vision statement speaks of human rights, financing for development, environmental prosperity, and of connecting the global to the community. Yet, you do not mention civil society, an essential partner in connecting global institutions to local communities. This matters more now than ever. We are witnessing the global deterioration of civic space, anti-rights voices increasingly co-opting human rights language and UN spaces, and states continuing to flout international law and violate human rights with impunity, even as we expect a severely under-resourced human rights pillar of the UN to respond effectively to these challenges. If selected Secretary General, and in the spirits of we the peoples, what principal steps would you take to strengthen the UN's relationship with civil society, ensuring we are not simply consulted, but meaningfully engaged in shaping your leadership priorities in upholding international law? Thank you.
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, World Alliance for Citizens Participation. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Madam. I would do two things. First, the Secretary General must do everything to reconnect the people of the world to the United Nations. The United Nations is primarily an association of member states, but the member states and the UN collectivity are acting, in the words of the Charter, in the names of the people. So the Secretary General should promote the ideals of the UN, invite the people of the world to be connected to it, give them hope, give them faith. The UN should not be an ivory tower divorced from the people of the world. Secondly, you heard me say how important it is for us to move from the global to the community, enunciate aspirations and policies and values which are important, but take them down and follow them down to their impact at the national and community level. My own experience, I think I mentioned a little earlier, the last 5 years, have been engaged in the womb of the community, and a very difficult enterprise of rebuilding a society devastated by war and encampment. So yes, not only do I believe in this, I hope the Secretary General will be somebody who is comfortable at all these levels, from the global to the national to the community. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Rule of Law.
Madam President, Excellencies, I have the honor to deliver this question on behalf of over 50 cross-regional members of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law, and would like to thank Mr. Otunnu for his presentation and answers provided so far. Excellencies, in recent years, we have witnessed breaches of even the most fundamental provisions of the UN Charter, including the obligation of all member states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force, as well as mass atrocities committed at large scale in grave breach of international law. All this paired with the failure of the Security Council to take action in response. So the questions of the Group of Friends of the Rule of Law to you would be: what concrete, proactive and preventive measures would you personally pursue, if elected as Secretary General, to strengthen the rule of law and prevent breaches by member states of the Charter's principles and of international law? What specific preventive diplomacy initiatives would you launch or strengthen? We look forward to the exchange, and I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the Group of Friends on the Rule of Law. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, thank you very much for your question concerning not just the provisions of the UN Charter, but rule of law across the board. As I said earlier, it's very important when we're talking about norms and standards and principles which have been agreed upon at the United Nations, that we should be even-handed, we should be non-selective. Nowhere is that more important than in the role of the Secretary General, because the Secretary General should be the custodian, the advocate, the voice for these principles and norms we are talking about, in a way which is very impartial. And sometimes the Secretary General may say it publicly, other times the Secretary General may take it up quietly behind the scene. On other occasions, the Secretary General might find a way to convene a small group to discuss this. There are various instruments available to the Secretary General to perform his or her role as the chief advocate, the main voice for the norms, the principles, the rules we have agreed upon. And that would be the way I would approach this matter. Very important, very important.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, followed by Uruguay and the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President, and I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, which is Poland, Ukraine, and my own country, Lithuania. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine continues to undermine the foundation of the international rules-based order. It has been accompanied by credible and well-documented reports of serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including the deportation of children, widespread attacks against civilian infrastructure, and arbitrary detention. These acts are not isolated incidents, but rather form patterns that demand a consistent and principled international response. At the same time, this situation has exposed important limitations within the current multilateral system. While a range of UN bodies and international mechanisms have been mobilized, challenges remain in ensuring effective coordination, preserving evidence, and ultimately delivering accountability. Strengthening collective actions across institutions is therefore essential to prevent impunity, uphold international law, and maintain trust in the UN system. Against this background, we would like to raise the following questions. How can coordination between the Security Council, the ICC, the General Assembly, and other UN bodies be improved to help prevent impunity? How can UN better support cooperation with international and national investigations to document and preserve evidence of war crimes in Ukraine. What practical role can the Secretary General and his good offices play in supporting the implementation of General Assembly resolutions, such as the resolution Return of Ukrainian Children of 3 December 2025, and advancing accountability in this situation? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative from Lithuania. On behalf of the Lublin Triangle, please, Mr. Otunnu.
I thank you, Excellency, for your question. The Security Council of the United Nations, the ICC, and all other entities of the UN which deal with standards and rules and resolutions of the UN should not accept impunity, should do everything to stop or discourage impunity. So that is clear, and it's not just for the ICC, the Security Council, for all the UN bodies. Secondly, I think you've heard me say explicitly that among the situations of conflict that I would address right away, engage in right away, see what the UN can do, would be the situation in Ukraine. I have also said, you heard me say earlier, that one of the most disturbing scenarios today is seeing that in all these conflicts, children, women, innocent people are suffering unbelievably. It's another reason why we cannot be indifferent. We must do everything to try to bring these conflicts to an end, because the toll, the tragedy on innocent people is unacceptable.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China.
Thank you, Madam President. The group attaches great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirms the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. In this regard, we wish to raise the following questions to Mr. Otunnu. First, on the UN80 initiative introduced by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal, and how do you believe it could advance a UN that is more effective, efficient, and delivers greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reforms fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the UN, preserve the balance among its three pillars, and do not come at the expense of development mandates or other priorities of developing countries? Second, on financing for development, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the UN system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support financing for development in a manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries, particularly at a time of shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps? Third, on geographical and gender balance, how would you, as Secretary General, ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geographical balance, as prescribed by Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation of unrepresented and underrepresented countries, especially from developing countries, at the senior level appointments within the UN Secretariat and the broader UN system? Fourth, on the UN financial situation, what concrete measures would you, as Secretary General, undertake to promote compliance with member states' financial obligations and ensure that assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions, particularly in light of the record level of arrears owed to the organization? Madam President, the Group of 77 in China underscores the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, while ensuring the provision of equitable and effective support to the representations of all member states in the discharge of their responsibilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. The Secretary General and the Secretariat must always be impartial, independent, respectful of member states and listening patiently to the member states. And of course, implementing the decisions of the member states. It is very important, Excellency, that the United Nations should be the United Nations of inclusion. The United Nations should, even in its bureaucracy, look like the world it represents. So it is very important that whether in terms of geography, in terms of cultures, in terms of gender, the UN should look like the world it represents. It should be very inclusive. Financing for development, as I said earlier, and also in my little vision statement, I elaborate on this, that first, I insist the responsibility begins at the national level. That the national authorities should assume responsibility for their development and do the right thing. Then the Secretary General can help to knock on doors that can bring more resources, and not just those which have been part of the official multilateral development funding or even bilateral development funding. There are other possible sources now available, and the Secretary General should knock on all of them to mobilize resources for countries which have done well to put in place the plan, the arrangements for their development. On the issue of reform, reform, as I said earlier, is no longer an option, it is an imperative. But reform is an imperative precisely because we want the good work which the UN has done in the past and continues to do now to continue. Reform should not be the ending of multilateralism, but the strengthening of multilateralism to make it more effective, have more impact, and have the UN of service. That is the purpose of reform. And it's also the reason why it mustn't be a project determined in time, but an attitude change, a transformation, a new culture that we install within the UN system. And then finally, I say that UN 80 is a wonderful basis on which to conduct reform. A good deal has been done. Much more needs to be done. We need to deepen what we should do. We need to consolidate programs and activities. We need to look more carefully at mandates to make sure that they are clear, that there are resources for carrying them out. There's a whole range of things we can put. But let me just say finally, Excellency, that in my experience, we could agree on 5 or 6 things which are critical to be done, experts and member states and the bureaucracy. But I think what has been lacking, perhaps, is the will to carry through what we have agreed upon. And I hope the next Secretary General will provide the leadership when member states have agreed with him or her on what should be done, that those things are carried through and implemented.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union, followed by the next civil society organization and Andorra.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank Mr. Otunnu for sharing his vision. I speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Belgium, Luxembourg, and my own country, the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We align with the statement delivered by the European Union. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary General who, 1, can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, and 2, who can act as a strong convening power across all 3 pillars, and 3, who can proactively contribute to prevention, peacebuilding, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence. We place high value on leadership that can connect the UN's development work with broader efforts on peace, security, and human rights, particularly in times of systemic stress. In your vision, Mr. Otunnu, you state that the next Secretary General should shepherd genuine and lasting reforms, with member states taking responsibility for coherent mandate creation, implementation, and review. What concrete steps would you take to encourage member states to align mandates with resources and to reduce duplication while preserving the UN's ability to respond to emerging needs? Finally, Mr. Otunnu, could you kindly share your early thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including the Deputy Secretary General? How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands on behalf of the Benelux Union. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, on the team around me, I would ensure that I have the most talented team possible, and that team reflects the membership, the cultures, the geography that compose the United Nations. Fortunately, talent is available across the globe, so that should be possible to do. On the issue of power and the role of the Secretary General, let me just say this. I say it in my vision statement, that the Secretary General does not wield conventional power. That is by design. The Secretary General has soft power that flows from two streams. The first is the principles of the Charter. He or she is the guardian of the principles of the Charter. And the second stream is the support of member states. When the Secretary General has these two, he or she has soft power, a platform on which to do some important things. I said earlier that reform should not be the ending of multilateralism. On the contrary, reform should strengthen multilateralism and give it the legitimacy it needs now, and the capacity to deliver better on the function, the role that is set out for the UN in the Charter. In terms of my leadership, I think everywhere where I've had the opportunity, whether within the UN or outside the UN, I brought a certain amount of rigor. I brought a certain amount of making sure that those who may have competing views are brought together. I put particular premium on coming up, not being shy, to propose inventive and innovative solutions. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the Light Millennium Charitable Global Human Advancement Organization. Please, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, and Mr. Candidate, the UN Charter promises sovereign equality to all nations. Yet, aggressive states violate national sovereignty to seize resources, destroying human rights, vital ecosystems, and irreplaceable cultural heritage with total impunity. The double standard erodes global security and UN credibility. Under UN 80 reform, my question is, if elected, what specific measurable actions will you take when a nation violates another sovereignty? And how will you use Article...
I thank the representative of the civil society organization, and I think how you will use the power of the Charter to implement it. If there is a violation, please, Mr. Otunnu, you have the floor.
Well, Madam, the UN Charter is explicit about this. It is explicit about forbidding infringement of national sovereignty in whatever form. So the Secretary General should stand on those principles, invoke them, promote them, encourage them. And even when they have been violated, the Secretary General should be engaged in seeking to restore the status quo ante, in seeking to restore and make sure that these principles are being observed. That is very clear. The Charter is very clear on that. What I would only add is that the Secretary General should be consistent, should be non-selective, and should be even-handed and impartial in invoking these principles and these values of the United Nations.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors, followed by Switzerland and Palau.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your strategic vision. And you spoke in French at the beginning of your presentation. We appreciate that. At a time when the UN is facing systemic crises and growing fragmentation of the international order, we believe that the issue of multilingualism is not a secondary one. The strategic lever to strengthen legitimacy, effectiveness, and inclusiveness in the multilateral system. We'd like to hear your personal position and your ability to bring this issue to the highest levels. Could you clarify in your UN work the role that you would place on multilingualism in your background and how you've come here? If you are elected Secretary General, how do you plan to make multilingualism a pivotal element of your leadership and not a simple functional tool? How will you ensure that your team's composition effectively represents linguistic, cultural, and geographic diversity at the UN? And lastly, with regard to your responsibilities when it comes to Secretariat governance, how do you plan to improve HR management to ensure that linguistic skills are fully recognized and given value during recruitment and progression processes in accordance with the requirements of linguistic diversity in Secretariat? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. You know, language is not just about communication. Language is a window on a society. Language is a badge of identity of a society. So languages, and all our languages, very important. In my prepared remarks, which I didn't read, I say more about the importance of multilingualism and promoting that within the United Nations. I believe in that very strongly. I come from a continent where there are many languages and where, you know, some of the more international ones are French, Arabic, Swahili, Hausa. There are many, many languages. So I believe that we should promote multilingualism and have the UN, as much as possible, reflect the world that it is composed of.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group, followed by Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this dialogue, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for presenting your vision. Good afternoon, colleagues. I speak on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, a cross-regional group of 27 member states committed to a transparent and accountable UN. We have two questions. The ACT Group has developed a code of conduct regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. This code of conduct urges Security Council members to pledge against voting no on credible draft resolutions aimed at preventing or halting genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, and encourages all Council members to take timely, decisive action during mass atrocities. It is supported by 130 member states. how do you see the SG's role in promoting the implementation of this code of conduct? And the second question, the selection and appointment process for the SG is fundamentally a joint process between the Security Council and the GA. But it is not the only area where they have a complementary mandate. How do you see the role of the GA in the maintenance of international peace and security? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland on behalf of the ACT Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. First, in terms of a joint process, the design of the UN Charter was to have the two bodies work in very close cooperation. And I think we should do everything to restore that the General Assembly and the Security Council work very closely together. Because the full membership is very important. The 15, including the 5, are also very important. So we really should have a cooperation between the two bodies. Now, the General Assembly initially did not have the role of peace and security. But that changed a little bit with the Uniting for Peace resolution, I think 1950. Very rarely used, very sparingly used, but it exists. But the most important thing is we should try not to enlarge polarization and tension within the UN as a body. It's one body. We should promote cooperation. And as Secretary General, I would be a go-between if there was any kind of tension to make sure that I bring the General Assembly, the Security Council, to some kind of cooperation. It is for the benefit of the institution. And I have good experience in working in both. Now, in terms of the code of conduct of which you speak, you know, all my adult life, I have been engaged in the vineyard of promoting human rights. From the time we resisted Idi Amin in Uganda as a young person to this day. More than that, you know that here at the United Nations, it fell to my lot to design, persuade Security Council members, and incorporate the regime for protecting children in situations of war. It is operational to this day. And from that, other mandates have now been added. So these are matters which are very close to my heart, which speaks to my experience, and where I have some idea what to do, where, and with whom.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Singapore and Australia.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for convening this important dialogue. And I also wish to thank Mr. Otunnu for your interaction with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. As a group of countries in special situations, the credibility of the United Nations lies in its ability to respond to the unique circumstances of SIDS, correct long-standing inequities, and deliver results for the most vulnerable. In this regard, allow me to pose the following questions. First, how will you, as Secretary General, ensure that the United Nations system is more accessible, better coordinated, and tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS, to better support the full implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS? And secondly, how will you use your leadership to accelerate global ambition and action on climate change, particularly to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach, while ensuring that SIDS receive scaled-up, predictable, and accessible finance for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage in line with international commitments? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. One of the very first systematic studies done on the vulnerability and situation of small island states and small countries was, I think, done under the auspices of the Commonwealth. Sir Sridhar Ramphal was the chair. I was a member of that commission. It did, I think, some of the early work on this matter. I've followed this ever since. I'm very acutely aware of the vulnerability, the situations of island states, small states, landlocked states. My own country of birth is landlocked and small. So I'm very acutely sensitive to the situation, and this will continue to be very much on the agenda of the Secretary General if I'm given the chance, and would certainly be advocate for them in every fora that matters. On the issue of climate change, let me say this. We have a number of very practical, common threats to our common humanity. Climate change is one. Earlier we spoke about how to harness the incredible impact of artificial intelligence. We can multiply the list. I would only appeal to member states that let us approach these common challenges that face humanity with cooperation and innovation, not from the point of view of perhaps ideological clashes and ideological confrontation, but in a very practical, pragmatic way with innovation and what we can do when we cooperate.
Thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for convening this meeting, and a warm welcome to Mr. Otunnu. Indeed, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. And more than 50 countries have aligned with this statement and will make this list available after this meeting. Madam President and Mr. Otunnu, we are living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. And for small states, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option, but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role, not only in defending the UN Charter, but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the UN. And we as small states look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, not just the big major powers and the permanent members, but to look after, in particular, the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right, where international law and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the SSG stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. Let me now go to the questions, and I'll focus on two in the interest of brevity. First, what steps, Mr. Otunnu, will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Council has been unable to take decisive action? And in particular, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Second, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact are landmark outcome documents which provide a roadmap for global action and partnership. What would you do to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, the Pact for the Future, and the Global Digital Compact? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. If I may say so, Excellency, you know, the UN as a multilateral institution is not only crucial for small states, I think it is important for all of us. That is why any reform we carry out should be to strengthen multilateralism, not to kill it. We shouldn't throw away the baby with the water in our reform project. So the sentiments you feel as small states, I think most member states feel. Let us work together to rescue multilateralism, strengthen it, reform the institution. Secondly, the importance of international law. Absolutely, absolutely. I strongly believe in that. I've contributed to that at various levels. I've taught that in various universities. It's very important for me personally and important to this institution. Now, you ask about the General Assembly and the Security Council. You know, the way this institution is designed, perhaps we should make the mistake. The General Assembly cannot take the place of the Security Council. Each have their role well defined within the Charter. But what we should promote, what the Secretary General should encourage, is cooperation between the two bodies, not conflict, not one taking over from the other. That is the way I would approach this. On SDGs, we are not on track to achieve what has been promulgated. I hope we can improve. And if I was elected Secretary General, I would make this a priority because the SDGs are very, very important to our development agenda, especially for the developing countries. And again, as I said earlier, countries must do their homework and be good custodian of the development agenda. They should fight corruption, they should plan, they should invest, they should mobilize what they can domestically, and then ask the Secretary General to help them mobilize what can be mobilized internationally. And I would be ready to do that.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of Cairns, followed by New Zealand and Uganda.
Madam President, Excellencies, Mr. Otunnu, a warm welcome. I have the honour to address you today on behalf of Canada, Australia, and my own New Zealand and my own country, Australia. At a time of heightened global uncertainty and complex international challenges, the United Nations' ability to fulfil its core mandate rests on its institutional credibility, capability and capacity. Institutional credibility requires bold and principled leadership, including the ability to deploy the Secretary-General's good officers with political courage and effect. Institutional capability requires a UN that is focused on upholding all three pillars of its work and translates early warning into early action. Institutional capacity requires experienced and ethical management and realistic and fit-for-purpose mandates that sharpen effectiveness and delivery. How do you think the UN80 initiative is working to align leadership, authority and resources to restore confidence in the UN and enable it to deliver results? And how would you build on the UN80 initiative to make it more effective? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia on behalf of Cairns. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I agree. All three pillars are very important. We should continue to work on all of them. That being said, it is fair to say that since the UN was founded in the aftermath of this horrific world war and the Holocaust, that particular emphasis should be placed on ending conflicts. And also because of the unbelievable suffering this visits on innocent people. That is why I have flagged the major conflicts going on now as a particular priority of the Secretary General. But all the three pillars are important. We must continue to work on all of them. Now, in terms of resources, it is not easy, and there's no easy answer. What is clear is that the UN is under enormous pressure. It can't carry all this burden. It is the reason why the UN should very intentionally work in partnership with other actors, especially regional organizations. When the UN was founded, there were barely any regional organizations. Thank God today there are several regional organizations, and some have played very useful and very important roles. They should be encouraged. They should be empowered. There should be partnership and cooperation between the UN and the regional bodies. And the UN should also reach out to other actors when we speak about, for example, artificial intelligence. The private sector, technology companies, they're very important in this. They should be at the table. They should have their say at the table. And this goes for climate change. It can go for other areas of UN activities as well. We should be more open to others, and they open to us.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group.
President, Mr. Otunnu, Excellencies, dear colleagues, I have the honour to ask the following question on behalf of the UN80 Global Group, a cross-regional group comprising of Barbados, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Norway, Mexico, Senegal, Singapore, and my own country, New Zealand. Mr. Otunnu, if elected as the next Secretary-General, what will you do to strengthen trust between the Secretariat and Member States, between the Executive Office of the Secretary-General and the rest of the UN system, and ultimately to restore global confidence in the United Nations itself? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand on behalf of the UN80 Global Group. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. It is clear that the primary stakeholders for the UN are member states, and that the Secretary-General and the Secretariat work for the member states in the service of the people. It's important there should be cooperation between member states and the Secretary-General and the Secretariat. Indeed, when we are involved in reform as we are now, we should take into account the views, the perspectives of member states, of the staff of the United Nations. Just at the opening of this session, we remembered UN staff who are paid with their lives in very dangerous situations. So the UN staff, their views, their role, and cooperation between the UN Secretariat and the membership is very important. And as Secretary-General, I would especially work to promote and encourage that. There shouldn't be two separate silos, and there should be no tension between the two. In terms of trust, you know, I have worked very closely with all members of the UN. I've worked very closely with members of the Security Council, with the P5. I have the experience of working with them all in difficult and not so difficult situations. I can draw on that. We cannot go very far if there is no trust, whether between the Secretary-General and member states, between the Security Council and the General Assembly, between the staff and member states. The Secretary-General is the go-between. He or she must make sure that trust is restored, that we are one house and moving in the same direction with common interests for humanity. Very, very important. Not easy, but very important.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. So far, the last speaker on behalf of the group, and then followed by member states, Latvia, Namibia, and many others.
I'm honored to speak on behalf of the 120 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement. The Non-Aligned Movement affirms the role of the United Nations in promoting multilateralism and international cooperation, which are essential for addressing global challenges that impact the member states of the movement. In this context, I raised the following questions. The declaration, question 1, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted by the United UN General Assembly in 1986, that is 40 years ago. What is your position on the right to development? And how would you advance its implementation within the UN system when you become the next Secretary General? Question 2, how do you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development and fully implement the 2030 Agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as next Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such measures that violate the UN Charter, urging their elimination and promoting mechanisms to prevent their application? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, I was there when the resolution on the right to development was adopted. As I said earlier, because human rights are so fundamental and so important, please let us return to the basics, which are clear in the Charter. What really matters is what we should return to. Development is very important, is one of the 3 pillars of UN action. And I would support that fully. It affects a large swath of the membership of the UN and of the population of the world. So we must not in any way relent in our efforts to promote development, and that is why the fate of the SDGs are very important. I've already commented on that. I've commented on the rule of law, all aspects of the rule of law. The Secretary General should encourage member states and all concerned to conduct themselves in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, in accordance with the principles of the United Nations which have been agreed upon, and in accordance with the norms which have been developed and agreed by the United Nations. That is the role of the Secretary General. He or she didn't make the principles, doesn't make them up, but invokes, promotes, and encourages the application of those principles and those norms.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. As we have exhausted the allotted time for the first segment, while there are still interest from member states to speak on the first segment, in the interest of time, I invite delegations to proceed also to the second segment to allow sufficient time to hear the candidates' response to the questions related to the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights, even though we already dived into many of them. Civil society questions will be again interspersed with questions from member states. Priority will be given to those who have not spoken in the first segment. And as mentioned before, we will also come to distinguished representative on behalf of their member states. I would like to remind you that speaking time on behalf of individual member states is 2 minutes for the questions and also 2 minutes for answering. As a first speaker, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia, followed by the next civil society organization and Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this interactive dialogue. And thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for your presentation on the vision for the position of the Secretary General of the United Nations and your responses so far. I would like to ask 2 questions. First one on the UN role in mediation, and the second one on the emerging technologies. So the first question on mediation: how can the UN remain relevant in mediation when negotiations increasingly happen outside the UN? In other words, how do you envisage to ensure UN's seat at the negotiating table? And the second question on the emerging technologies: which emerging technology challenge, for example, AI, cybersecurity, biotechnology, or others, requires the most urgent UN attention? What will be your first steps to tackle it? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, mediation, good offices, the go-between, facilitating, convening role of the Secretary General is capital. That is what the Secretary General is there for. So the Secretary General should always be engaged, should be probing, should be listening patiently, should not be shy to suggest. That is one. On emerging technology, there are various spheres of emerging technology. In my view, the one that right now is most transformational, that will have such incredible impact on society, is artificial intelligence. That is why I think it's so important that the UN should come in, convene the stakeholders, put to them certain issues which are important, and hope that we can come up early with a compact that helps to govern the development of artificial intelligence and transform the world for the better and for everybody.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by CMI, Marty Atasari Peace Foundation, our next civil society organization.
conflict resolution and mediation happen today more and more outside UN official structures and without UN mandate. What could the new UN Secretary General do to better prevent and resolve violent conflicts? And what is the role of civil society in all of this?
I thank CMI for their question. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. When I was involved in developing the regime for the protection of children affected by war, I visited many conflict situations. I met with civil society groups. I met with parties in conflict, those which may be state actors, non-state actors, all of them. So I have some deep experience how to insert the UN in a way which is appropriate, be of service, and help the parties in conflict or help those who are contesting a particular situation. Secondly, I know that preventing conflict is easier said than done, in part because even when the signs are there, the parties in conflict may be in denial. Nevertheless, it is the role of the Secretary General to be engaged, to be prodding, to be suggesting, to be calling attention to what requires action. This perhaps, good officers, mediation, being a facilitator, convener, is one of the most important roles of the Secretary General and is part of the soft power of the Secretary General to which I referred earlier.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next speaker, to the next distinguished speaker of Namibia, followed by Cuba and Peru.
Thank you, Madam President. In September 2024, world leaders adopted the most wide-ranging international agreement in many years, namely the Pact for the Future. The Pact has brought renewed impetus towards the implementation of the SDGs. This notable agreement has reinvigorated the multilateral system and has given direction in a number of important global multilateral thematic issues. My question to Mr. Otunnu is, what is your vision to implementing the Pact for the Future, and how best can the Secretariat support Member States in its implementation ahead of the 2028 review? Secondly, in the Pact for the Future, world leaders agreed that Africa should be treated as a priority and a special case as far as the reform of the UN Security Council is concerned. What is your understanding of this unique decision taken by Member States, and how would your office support its implementation? Lastly, what would be your plan to making the international financial architecture more representative and fair, as borrowing rates for Africa are much higher than other parts of the world, thereby structurally disadvantaging Africa's development? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Namibia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you, Excellency. In terms of reorganizing and restructuring international financial institutions, I do not believe that the Secretary General would have a key role there, but the Secretary General, nevertheless, must always be ready to suggest, draw attention to some of the historical imbalances, draw attention to vulnerabilities, so that those who are at the table and make the decision would take these into account. In terms of what the Pact for the Future says about Africa's outlook on reform of the Security Council, perhaps, Africa outlook is partly determined by what is viewed by Africa as a historical imbalance. But as I said earlier, reforming the Security Council is not the primary role, doesn't belong to the Secretary General, even though the Secretary General should encourage, should draw attention to factors to be taken into account, and should try to encourage some kind of a consensus to emerge. The main discussion in the processes which are already in place, the intergovernmental process in place, is really between the member states, especially the permanent 5, and the rest of the membership. The Pact for the Future was a very important landmark document. We should work with it, and I hope that come 2028, we will have much to show in terms of what has been achieved as a result of the Pact for the Future. But I support very much the provisions of the Pact. I support very much the measures that needs to be taken. I hope that 2028 would show good results.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Mr. Olara Otunnu, Cuba thanks you for this opportunity to engage in these interactive dialogues, and we reiterate the need for the selection process for the Secretary-General to be open, transparent, and inclusive. We align ourselves with the questions asked by the G77, the NAM and AOSIS, and we'd like to ask the following questions in our national capacity. What concrete structural reforms will you engage in to transform the international financial system into one that is more just, inclusive and representative, that would effectively respond to the needs and priorities of developing countries, including access to finance, debt relief, and louder voice and agency in decision-making? And how do you see the role of the UN in this process? Our second question, given the growing rise of conflicts and the proliferation of warmongering rhetoric, what actions will the Secretary-General engage in to promote a culture of peace, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and respect for the principle of the non-use of force? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, first, the Secretary-General should always invoke the Charter. They should always rest on the principles of the Charter, regardless of the situation, in a way which is impartial, in a way which is equal, and a way which is responsible. Secondly, Excellency, about the structures of the IFIs, the International Financial Institution, two roles for the Secretary-General. They are not central. I don't want to mislead you. They are not central, but they are nevertheless important roles to be played by the Secretary-General. One is advocacy, using the moral platform of the Secretary-General, using the soft power of the Secretary-General to sensitize, to highlight, to underscore the important factors that should be taken into account by the decision makers. And secondly, in the case of particular countries in need, as I said earlier, when they have done their own homework and their own planning and their own mobilization of resources domestically and fighting corruption, is for the Secretary-General to knock on certain doors on their behalf. These are the two roles for the Secretary-General. And then those who must decide on restructuring the international financial institution take this into account.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru, followed by the Russian Federation and the next civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Otunnu, for your presentation. Peru is participating in this dialogue with the firm commitment to strengthen the United Nations in order for it to be able to address in a cooperative manner the challenges that humanity faces. Inspired by the legacy of Pérez de Cuellar, the only UN Secretary-General from the Latin American and the Caribbean region, we reaffirm the importance of leadership that is able to bring about consensus in the current international context that is marked by growing complexity, volatility, and uncertainty. In fact, my delegation wishes to recognize that Mr. Otunnu was a key stakeholder in the election of Ambassador de Cuellar, representing his country at the Security Council during the crucial moments for that selection process. We'd like to ask the following question. Next year, 2027, will see the beginning of the debate on the future of the Sustainable Development Goals, moving towards 2030. So what do you think about what should happen after 2030? What concrete actions will you be engaging in to bring back the effective capacity of the Secretary-General to lead, to contribute, to respond to emerging threats to international peace and security, such as transnational organised crime and AI governance? Those are our questions. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Yes, indeed, I have very fond memories and great respect for Secretary-General Perez de Cuellar. On the SDGs, there are two things that we need to do. First, the Secretary-General need to find ways and knock on doors to generate more resources for countries which are struggling to fulfill the SDGs. But again, I repeat, countries that have done their own work at home, they're responsible, they're fighting corruption, they're planning, they're investing, they're mobilizing resources. Then the Secretary-General can come and give a helping hand. And secondly, it's also, I think, important that in terms of advocacy, the Secretary-General should continue to be a key advocate. And thirdly, I would say this, I think I said it earlier, that for me it's very important the UN shouldn't be a diplomatic ivory tower. The SDGs are important. I believe in them. But we should now follow the trail of the SDGs as they go to national and to community levels to make sure that we are connected, that we have the same understanding, and that these things will in fact produce the results we want. I don't have time to give you examples of how some of the Millennium Development Goals that I was very much involved in went wrong in terms of implementation at the national and local levels. We should guard against that.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Distinguished President, Russia believes it's important to select the most worthy candidate that will be in line with the high standards of professionalism and competency and dedication to the goals and principles of the UN Charter in all of their entirety and interconnections. We'd like to therefore ask a few questions to Mr. Otunnu. First of all, Mr. Otunnu, the Secretary General, is to be guided by the General Assembly. Would you think that it ought to be guided by resolutions that go beyond the UN's authority, especially those that are currently considered by the Security Council? Do you believe that the principles of the Charter can be ranked by importance, in which the Secretariat would be able to arbitrarily interpret situations using certain principles, for example, for territorial integrity and self-determination? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Excellency, as I said earlier, the role of the Security Council, the role of the General Assembly, complementary as set out in the Charter. One shouldn't try to displace the other. And also, as much as possible, we should avoid conflict between the two institutions. That being said, we do have in the record of the UN, the Uniting for Peace going back to 1950, as I said earlier, used very rarely and very sparingly. And as Secretary General, I'll do everything to make sure that we bring back cooperation, cordiality between these two important organs of the United Nations, the Security Council and the General Assembly, and even among the Security Council members.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, the African Development Interchange Network. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led rights of women and girls.
Sorry, can we stop the time and you repeat because we could not hear you? I think the microphone was not working. If you could just start again and we put the timer again as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led by a woman.
Sorry again, but I think you're pressing the microphone. Once it's on, don't press the button. So we go again.
For 80 years, the United Nations has never been led by a woman, even as gender equality and the human rights of women and girls remain central to its commitments. At a time when those rights are increasingly being challenged, how would you, Mr. Otunnu, use the authority and leadership of the Secretary General to defend hard-won gains, confront gender-based violence and discrimination, and ensure that equality is reflected within the United Nations itself? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your understanding, and everybody could understand the question. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Madam. I believe strongly in equality. I believe strongly in gender parity and would promote that at every opportunity as Secretary General. Secondly, Madam, I spent several years, it was pioneering work at the time, incorporating the protection, the well-being of children and women and innocent people as an integral and substantive aspect of the peace and security agenda of the Security Council. I'm very happy that that has now been broadened to incorporate other aspects of peace and security, and I support that very, very strongly. So what you are suggesting is a natural extension of what I've been doing for many, many years. I also said earlier that one of the reasons why we can't be indifferent to the major conflicts going on is when we see the impact of that conflict on the ground, what it does to children, women, and innocent people.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador, followed by Indonesia, the Philippines, and the next civil society organization. These are so far the remaining speakers on the list. If anybody else would like to request the floor, please press the button now. Otherwise, we would close this. Please, the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Mr. Otunnu for participating in these dialogues. In different parts of the planet, transnational organised crime is undermining state institutions, feeding violence, exacerbating conflicts, and compromising the protection of human rights. Your vision statement underscores the importance of prevention, early action, strengthening cooperation with regional organisations, and the leadership of the Secretary-General to build consensus. In this context, do you think that the United Nations should give more priority to transnational organised crime within its peace and security agenda? And what concrete initiatives would you engage in as Secretary-General to promote a more comprehensive and coordinated response from the UN system and from regional organisations in response to this challenge? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
This is a new evolving phenomenon with major implications. And there are parts of the world which are already being seriously affected by transnational organized crimes. The UN should look very carefully at this and see what contribution it can make beyond what is now being done by the agencies which are in place. So I will do more homework in that area. I can't say now for you that this and that is what we'll do, but it's a very important issue. It should be looked at very seriously and something proposed that can make a contribution to pushing back the growth of transnational organized crimes.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
We appreciate the President of the General Assembly for convening this meeting. Excellency, we thank you for sharing your vision for the future of the United Nations. At a time when multilateralism is facing increasing fragmentation, the role of the Secretary General is more critical than ever to serve as a moral leader and a bridge builder. In this regard, Indonesia would like to pose the following questions. With multilateralism under increasing strain, do you believe incremental reform is sufficient, or is there a need for more fundamental recalibration to the system? How will you overcome persistent resistance to change while ensuring the UN adapts to current and future realities? Second, in an era of complex fragmentation, how do you intend to revitalize the UN role as the prominent forum for open dialogue among leaders to foster mutual understanding and solidarity? Lastly, how do you envision strengthening meaningful youth participation in shaping global norms and contributing to forward-looking and future-ready multilateral solution? We look forward to your insights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. Please, Mr. Otunnu.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I said earlier that even though member states are the immediate association that compose the UN is also about the people. And so the Secretary General should reach out to the people, should invite them to be involved, should connect the UN to them, should give them some sense of hope and faith in this institution. And when I'm speaking about the people, obviously, perhaps the most important single segment are the youth. After all, the Charter says succeeding generations. And so we should get them more engaged with the work and the enterprise of the United Nations. And then you spoke about resistance to reform. Well, there may be a tendency to have some pockets of resistance. I wouldn't be surprised if within the Secretariat, among member states, the role of the Secretary General is to work on that, to make sure that we go from resistance to acceptance and cooperation. Because long-term, these reforms are for the benefit of the United Nations and for the people of the world. Long-term, the risks are real if we don't face up to serious, thoroughgoing reforms right now. Now, you spoke about incremental or fundamental. I think in my remarks it's clear. I said reform is not an optional choice. Right now, it is an imperative. And therefore, to me, we should go do fundamental changes. We should change the attitude of our attitude. We should change the culture of work, like any major institutions in the world will do all the time. It should be the same at the United Nations.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. I now give the floor as the next speaker to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, followed by the next civil society organization, which will also ask the last questions for today's interactive dialogue. So we will end a bit earlier. Please, distinguished representative of Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Otunnu, we thank you for sharing your vision for the future of the United Nations. As chair of the like-minded group for middle-income countries, the Philippines would like to inquire how you believe the UN's support to middle-income countries can be improved, considering that the majority of the world's poor continue to live in middle-income countries, including a strategic plan for action for mix and a dedicated focal point in the Secretariat, which the like-minded group have been consistently calling for. In particular, how do you see the opportunities provided by UN80 to rethink and recalibrate and strengthen partnerships for and with the middle-income countries throughout the United Nations system? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines indeed. I now give the floor to Mr. Otunnu again to answer.
Excellency, you know, in working on this, we should not leave any group out. For example, quite rightly, we have been putting emphasis on the most vulnerable countries, least developed countries, island countries, for understandable reason. But we must not leave out of the picture middle-income countries that have done relatively well. We want them to do even better. So as Secretary General, I would remain engaged with their development. I would remain engaged with their concerns. I would be advocate for them as well.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. As a final question, I now give the floor to the last civil society organization and invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by Ayufun Foundation Trust.
On behalf of Edufund Foundation Trust India, grassroots organizations working directly with vulnerable community are already addressing urgent challenges such as hunger, climate change, and social inequality, often with minimal resources. Despite their impact, they remain underrepresented in global decision-making and struggle to access institutional funding. If appointed as Secretary General, how will you ensure the grassroots civil society organizations are meaningfully included in shaping development policies and gain equitable access to funding and support within the United Nations system?
I thank the Foundation Trust, Ayufun. Please, Mr. Otunnu, to respond to the last question, also sum up the interactive dialogue.
Grassroots and civil society, that is where I've been buried the last 5 years. In the project of Rocho Pacho in northern Uganda, which is working with women and youth and communities of faith and people of different political persuasion coming together in a movement to rebuild a broken society. So I have some experience of doing that. I would just say to you, distinguished excellencies and delegates, that what I bring are decades of experience across the UN pillars. It is decades in every situation of leadership working to build consensus, working to propose innovative solutions. And it is experience, as this last question suggests, of working at the grassroots. I feel at home here, but not only here. I'm at home at the national level in different parts of the world. I've worked with them, I've been to their countryside. And I'm at home at the grassroots. That's where I've been the last 5 years. Not just in my country, but also elsewhere when I was involved with the UN. So I just hope that you will give consideration to this candidature and that what I bring may be helpful for the UN at this critical moment and the kind of leadership it needs. I thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Otunnu. We have come to the end of this interactive dialogue. I would like to thank the candidate, you, Mr. Otunnu. I would like to thank you, all delegations and distinguished representatives, for your participation and your contributions. As announced in my letter at the beginning of the week, we have another interactive dialogue tomorrow as we have another candidate. So we will be back tomorrow. I wish you all a good day. The meeting is adjourned.